the moment the coffee hit his shoe, every single person in the restaurant froze. Because the man standing there wasn't just rich. He was the kind of man people avoided making eye contact with. The kind of man who had fired someone for speaking out of turn. The kind of man who hadn't fallen in love, not once in 36 years. And yet, in that exact moment, instead of anger, Ben William didn't move. He stared at her. Like something inside him had just stopped working. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something real quick. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your country or city in the comments. I actually read them, and I want to see how far this story is reaching. But enough about that. Because right now, we have a much bigger problem to deal with. Starting with Ben Williams standing at the edge of something he had spent his entire life avoiding. Ben didn't believe in love, not in the poetic sense, not in the emotional sense. And definitely not in the reckless, life-altering kind. To him, love was a liability, a distraction. A weakness disguised as something beautiful. And he had spent years making sure nothing, no one, could ever weaken him. At 36, Ben William wasn't just a billionaire. He was control, discipline, and precision wrapped in a perfectly tailored suit. His days were scheduled down to the minute. His circle was small, his emotions even smaller. People didn't get close to him, not because they didn't try, but because he didn't let them. The last person who had tried to lecture him about finding love was quietly removed from his life. Not dramatically, not loudly, just gone. That was how Ben handled problems, clean, silent, final. So when he walked into that restaurant in Florida that evening, nothing was supposed to change. It never did. Same table, same order, same distance from everyone else. Control, that was the point, until she walked in. Mitchell Campbell wasn't supposed to be there. Not at that hour, not in that place, and definitely not in front of him. She looked exhausted, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that sits behind your eyes. The kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. Her hair was slightly messy, like she didn't have time to fix it properly. Her movements were rushed, distracted, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. Because it was, her phone buzzed again in her hand. She glanced at it briefly, and whatever she saw made her jaw tighten. She sighed under her breath, grabbed her coffee, and turned too quickly. That's when it happened. The cup slipped, the lid popped. And hot coffee spilled directly onto Ben Williams' shoe. A sharp gasp cut through the air. Someone dropped a fork. A waiter froze mid-step, because everyone knew this was bad, very bad. Mitchell's eyes widened instantly. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. She stepped closer, panic rushing into her voice. I didn't see you, I wasn't looking, I'm so sorry. She reached for napkins, hands moving quickly, trying to fix something that couldn't be undone. But Ben didn't say anything, didn't react, didn't even look at his shoe. He was looking at her, really looking. And for the first time in years, Ben William forgot what he was supposed to feel. There was something about her, not perfection, not polish. Not the kind of beauty he was used to seeing at elite events and controlled environments. This was different, real, unfiltered. And for some reason, it hit him harder than anything ever had. I said I'm sorry, she repeated, softer this time. Her voice had changed, less panic, more sincerity, more weight. Ben blinked, like he was snapping back into reality. Then finally, he spoke. It's fine. The entire restaurant went silent again, because that wasn't supposed to happen. Mitchell froze. What? It's just a shoe, Ben said calmly. It'll survive. Now she was staring at him, confused, trying to figure out if he was serious. Because most men wouldn't react like this. And something about him told her he wasn't most men. You're not mad, she asked cautiously. Ben hesitated, and for a split second, he almost said yes. Out of habit, out of expectation, out of who he had always been. But then he looked at her again, really looked at the tiredness in her eyes. The stress she wasn't hiding well. The way she kept glancing at her phone like something else mattered more than this moment. And something shifted. "No," he said finally. "I'm not." That answer changed everything, even if neither of them knew it yet. Mitchell let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Okay, wow. Thank you. Seriously. I thought you were about to." She stopped herself, shook her head. "Never mind." Ben almost smiled, almost. "You seem like you've had a long day," he said. That caught her off guard. Because that wasn't the kind of question strangers asked. "You could say that." There was a pause, a strange one, not awkward. Just unexpected. Ben glanced at the empty seat across from him, then back at her. "Sit." Now she blinked. "Excuse me." "Sit," he repeated, nodding toward the chair. "Unless you're in a rush." She hesitated. Every logical part of her brain said no. Don't sit, don't get involved, don't complicate your already complicated life. But something about him made it hard to walk away. 5 minutes, she said finally. Ben nodded once, like that was all he needed. And that was the moment everything began. At first, the conversation was simple, surface level, safe. But it didn't stay that way, because Mitchell wasn't pretending. She didn't have the energy to, not tonight. "You ever feel like no matter how hard you try," she said quietly, staring at her coffee, "life just keeps stacking things on top of you?" Ben didn't answer immediately. Because he wasn't used to conversations like this. "Explain," he said. She let out a small, tired laugh. "I've got a kid at home. Bills that don't care how tired I am. A job that barely pays enough, and somehow every day, there's something new." Ben's expression didn't change, but his attention sharpened. "A kid?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah." There was something in the way she said it. Not regret, not burden, just responsibility. And suddenly, this wasn't just a random woman who spilled coffee on his shoe. This was someone fighting a life he had never experienced. "And you're here?" he asked. She smiled faintly. 5 minutes of quiet. That's all I needed. Ben leaned back slightly, studying her. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the most complex person in the room. And that intrigued him more than anything. Minutes passed, then more. 5 minutes turned into 20, then 30. Neither of them noticed, until Mitchell's phone buzzed again. This time, her expression changed completely. She stood up immediately. "I have to go." Fast, urgent, no explanation. Ben stood too, without thinking. "Wait." She paused, turned back. For a brief second, their eyes locked again. And this time, it wasn't just curiosity, it was something deeper. Something neither of them had planned. "Your number," Ben said. Direct, simple, she hesitated. Because this was the moment where things either stayed simple or became something else entirely. "Why?" she asked. Ben didn't even blink. "Because I don't want this to be the only time I see you." Silence, the kind that changes direction. Mitchell looked at him for a long second. Then slowly she gave a small nod. "Okay." And just like that, she gave him her number. But what Ben didn't know, as he watched her walk out of that restaurant, was that Mitchell Campbell wasn't just tired. She was one decision away from walking away from everything. And the next time he saw her, she might not be the same woman who spilled coffee on his shoe. Ben William did not text first, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't do things like that. For years, every interaction in his life had been calculated, controlled, efficient. People came to him, not the other way around. And yet for the first time in a very long time, his phone felt heavier than usual. Her number sat there, untouched, unanswered, unresolved. He lasted 3 hours, then he broke his own rule. "Are you home?" He stared at the message after sending it, jaw tightening slightly, as if he had just made a mistake he couldn't undo. No response. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Ben placed his phone down on the table, but his attention never left it. He told himself it didn't matter, that this was nothing. That she was just a woman who spilled coffee on his shoe. But his mind betrayed him, her voice, her eyes. The way she carried exhaustion like it had weight. 20 minutes passed, then, his phone lit up. "You just got in, sorry." Something in his chest shifted, small, but undeniable. "Good." He paused. "That wasn't enough. You left in a hurry." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, came back again. "My son needed me." Ben's gaze sharpened. "Is he okay?" This time, the reply came slower. "He's fine. Just doesn't like being alone too long." Ben leaned back slightly, absorbing that there was something behind those words. Something she wasn't saying. "You handle everything alone." A longer pause. "I have to." That answer stayed with him, long after the conversation ended. Long after the screen went dark. Because for the first time, Ben wasn't thinking about control. He was thinking about someone else's weight, and that was new. The next few days didn't follow any pattern Ben recognized. He texted her more, not constantly, not obsessively. But enough that it became noticeable, to him, to her. Mitchell didn't pretend with him, that was the difference. She didn't filter her exhaustion, didn't polish her reality. Didn't try to impress him. And strangely, that drew him in more than anything else ever had. One night, just after midnight, his phone buzzed again. "Are you awake?" He was, he always was. "Yes." There was a delay, then. "Can I ask you something?" Ben sat up slightly. "Ask," he said. A few seconds passed before the message came through. "Why were you so calm that night?" He frowned slightly. "Which part?" "The coffee. Most people wouldn't react like that." Ben stared at the screen, because the honest answer wasn't something he had ever said out loud. "Because you looked like you had bigger problems than my shoes." The typing bubble appeared almost instantly this time, then stopped, then appeared again. "You noticed that?" Ben exhaled slowly. "I notice more than people think." There was a long pause after that, longer than usual. "Then, you're different too." His brow furrowed slightly. "Explain." This time, the response took time, real time. "You don't talk like someone who needs anything from anyone." Ben's jaw tightened. "I don't," the reply came softer. "That must be lonely." And just like that, she said something no one had ever said to him before. Ben didn't respond, not immediately, because he didn't know how to. Lonely. He had never described his life that way, never needed to. But now, the word sat there, uncomfortable, accurate. That night, he didn't sleep. 3 days later, he saw her again. This time, it wasn't accidental. He chose the same restaurant, same time, same table. And he waited. He told himself it was coincidence, routine, nothing more. But when the door opened, and she walked in, he stopped pretending. Mitchell looked just as tired as before, maybe more. But this time, when she saw him, she didn't look surprised. She walked over slowly. "You planned this," she said, raising an eyebrow slightly. Ben didn't deny it. "I was hoping you'd show up." She exhaled softly, shaking her head, but there was a small smile hiding there. "That's dangerous." "Why?" "Because hope usually leads to disappointment." Ben leaned back slightly, studying her again, not always. She didn't argue that, instead, she sat down. And just like before, the world around them faded. But this time, the conversation went deeper, faster. "You ever think about just stopping?" she asked suddenly. Ben's gaze sharpened. "Stopping what?" She shrugged lightly. "Everything. The stress. The constant pressure. Just walking away." There it was again, that edge in her voice, that line she kept walking close to. Ben leaned forward slightly. And would you? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at her hands. I don't get that option, she said quietly. Because of your son. She nodded. He's the only reason I keep going some days. Ben's chest tightened slightly, a reaction he didn't expect. Didn't understand. Some days, he asked. She looked up at him, and for the first time, there was no filter at all. Some days are harder than others. Silence settled between them, heavy, real. And for once, Ben didn't try to control it. He simply sat there, with her. You don't have to carry everything alone, he said finally. She gave him a small, almost sad smile. Everyone says that. I'm not everyone. That made her pause, really pause. Because there was something in his voice this time, something steady, unshaken. Something that made his words feel real. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, and everything changed. Her expression, her posture, her breathing. I have to go, she said quickly, standing up. Ben stood too. Mitchell. But she was already stepping back. I'm sorry. I'll explain later, okay? And just like that, she was gone again, faster than before. Leaving Ben standing there, with more questions than answers. That night, he didn't wait 3 hours. What happened? No response. 10 minutes, 20, an hour. Nothing. Ben's jaw tightened. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not frustration, but something else, something sharper. Concern. The next morning, his phone buzzed. I'm okay. Just a rough night. Ben stared at the message. That wasn't enough. Not anymore. Because somewhere between that spilled coffee and this moment, Mitchell Campbell had become something he couldn't ignore. And what he didn't realize yet was that her rough nights weren't just about exhaustion. They were about a life slowly closing in on her. A life that was about to force a choice, and when that choice came, Ben William would either step in or lose her completely. Ben William did not like uncertainty, he didn't like not knowing, didn't like waiting. Didn't like feeling like something was slipping beyond his control. And yet for the third time in a week, Mitchell had disappeared from his reach. He stood in his penthouse that night, staring out over the Florida skyline. Phone in his hand, unread messages sitting there like unfinished thoughts. I'm okay, just a rough night, that was all she had given him. And somehow, that made it worse. Because now he knew, this wasn't random, this wasn't occasional stress. This was something deeper, something she kept stepping into, and walking out of like it was normal. Ben exhaled slowly, jaw tightening. For most of his life, when something didn't make sense, he investigated it. Quietly, thoroughly, completely. But this was different, because this wasn't business. This was her, and for the first time, he hesitated. Not because he couldn't find answers, but because he wasn't sure if he had the right to. That hesitation didn't last long. By morning, he made a decision. If she wasn't going to tell him everything, he was going to understand enough to help. Not control, not interfere, but help. Later that day, he saw her again. This time, he didn't wait for coincidence. He went to her. Mitchell was sitting outside a small cafe. Her phone in one hand, her other hand pressed lightly against her forehead. She looked worse than before, more tired, more worn down. When she noticed him standing there, her eyes widened slightly. You're starting to make a habit of this, she said, trying to sound light. Ben didn't smile. You didn't answer, he said. She looked away. I told you, I was fine. You said you were okay, he corrected calmly. That's not the same thing. That made her pause, because it wasn't. Silence stretched between them, then she sighed long, heavy. I don't want to drag you into my problems, she said quietly. Ben stepped closer. You didn't drag me into anything. She let out a small, tired laugh. You don't even know what this is. Then tell me. There it was, simple, direct, unavoidable. Mitchell hesitated, not because she didn't want to speak, but because once she did, there was no taking it back. My son, she said finally. Ben's attention locked in instantly. He's been having issues, she continued. Nothing dangerous. Just, he doesn't like being alone. He panics, cries, sometimes he won't sleep unless I'm there. Ben listened, didn't interrupt. I work late sometimes, she went on. And every time I do, it's like I'm choosing between keeping a roof over our heads. She swallowed slightly. Or being there when he needs me. That hit harder than anything else she had said before. And last night? Ben asked. She shook her head. The sitter canceled. I had to rush back. He was crying when I got there. Her voice cracked slightly on that last part, just slightly, but enough. I can't keep doing this, she admitted softly. Ben watched her carefully. Then don't. She looked up at him instantly. It's not that simple. It is. That made her frown. No, it's not. I don't have options like you do. Ben stepped closer, not aggressive, not forceful, just certain. You do. She shook her head. I don't. Yes, you do, he repeated, voice steady. You just haven't allowed yourself to see them yet. That frustrated her. You don't understand. I understand enough. His tone didn't rise, didn't harden, but it carried something heavier than volume. Finality, Mitchell went quiet, because for the first time, she realized something. He wasn't speaking like someone offering sympathy. He was speaking like someone who solved problems. A slow breath left her. Why do you care this much? She asked. That question lingered, hung between them. Ben didn't answer immediately. Because the truth wasn't something he had ever said out loud. Not like this, but then, he looked at her. Really looked, and the answer came. Because you mattered to me. Simple, clean, uncomplicated. And somehow, that made it hit harder. Mitchell's breath caught slightly. Ben. But he didn't let her deflect. Let me help you, he said. She hesitated again, that same hesitation. Fear, doubt, independence fighting with exhaustion. I don't want to depend on anyone, she said quietly. Ben nodded once. Then don't. She frowned slightly. That's not how that works. It is, he said calmly. I'm not asking you to depend on me. I'm choosing to show up. That landed differently. Because that wasn't control, wasn't pressure, it was choice. And that was harder to reject. Days passed, and something shifted. Ben didn't take over her life, didn't overwhelm her. Didn't try to fix everything overnight. He did something far more dangerous. He stayed, consistently, quietly. He made sure her son had support, reliable, safe, present. He adjusted her schedule, without making it feel like charity. He gave her space, while removing the weight that had been crushing her. And slowly Mitchell started to breathe again. Not all at once, but enough. One evening, weeks later, they stood together outside her apartment. Nothing dramatic, no chaos, no crisis, just stillness. I'm not used to this, she admitted softly. Used to what? Ben asked. Things, not falling apart. Ben looked at her. They won't, he said simply. She studied him for a moment. You say that like you're sure. I am. No hesitation, no doubt, because for the first time, Ben wasn't controlling everything. He was choosing something, and that made all the difference. Months later, everything had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Mitchell wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. Her son was stable, happy, safe. And Ben, he was no longer the man who avoided love. He was the man who chose it, fully, completely. Without seeing it as weakness. Because now, he understood something he never had before. Love wasn't loss of control. It was the only thing that made control worth having. The proposal wasn't extravagant, no crowd, no spectacle. Just the two of them. Real. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. Ben looked at her, calm, certain, unshaken. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And this time, he meant it. Because the men who once avoided love had finally chosen something he couldn't control. And for the first time, he didn't want to. If you made it this far, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this, they only get deeper from here.